Greetings, seekers of truth. Today we are diving into a topic that usually evokes either a skeptical smile or the keen interest of science fiction fans. We are talking about people of giant stature. However, do not jump to conclusions, assuming that we are about to retell ancient fairy tales or myths without any evidentiary basis. In this piece, we are intentionally casting aside mysticism, speculation, and unverified legends. We are interested only in facts. Cold, hard, and often uncomfortable facts that contradict the familiar picture of the world. We are used to thinking that giants are a figment of the imagination of ancient storytellers, a metaphor for natural forces, or simply errors in the translation of old texts. But reality sometimes turns out to be far more fantastic than any fiction. Imagine that evidence for the existence of a race of giants isn't hidden in secret bunkers or lost in impenetrable jungles. It lies literally right before our eyes, in the display cases of the world's most famous museums, in private collections, and on the pages of old books. We are talking about very material objects, weapons that an ordinary person cannot even lift, books of colossal size, and, most amazingly, biological remains against which modern medical norms look like descriptions of children. These artifacts have been gathering dust on shelves for years. Thousands of tourists walk past them. Guides monotonously recite memorized scripts. But few stop to ask one simple yet frightening question. Who could physically use this? If we cast aside prejudice and look at the official exhibits of the British Museum or other historical repositories with an open mind, the picture of the past begins to crack at the seams. We see objects dating back to the 19th century or earlier periods, the dimensions of which absolutely do not fit the physiology of Homo sapiens as we understand it. This isn't just a slight deviation in height, it is a fundamental difference in scale. What if I told you that human history is not a straight line of evolution from small to large, but perhaps a history of coexistence, where we were not the only intelligent species? What if the legends of titans, Nephilim, and mighty heroes are not exaggerated memories, but a documentary chronicle of times when we shared this planet with those who looked down on us in the most literal sense? This perspective changes everything. It forces us to reconsider not only the history of architecture and engineering, but also our own origins.
Historiker versuchen meist, das Vorhandensein riesiger Objekte mit den Worten rituell oder zeremoniell zu erklären. Angeblich wurden riesige Schwerter und Musketen ausschließlich zur Schönheit oder zur Abschreckung geschaffen, nicht für den Kampf. Aber jeder Waffenexperte wird euch sagen, dass selbst Zeremonialwaffen ergonomisch sein müssen. Man muss sie irgendwie halten und bewegen können. Die Artefakte, über die wir sprechen werden, weisen Gebrauchsspuren, funktionale Details und Konstruktionsmerkmale auf, die darauf hindeuten, dass sie für eine reale Hand geschaffen wurden. Nur war diese Hand 2- oder sogar 3-mal größer als unsere.
Before we open this Pandora's box and touch upon forbidden history, make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have liked this video. Your activity is the fuel that helps us dig up the truth that others are trying so hard to forget or silence. Join our community of researchers because we will have to piece this puzzle together. We begin our investigation not with vague legends written thousands of years ago, but with what was documented relatively recently. The 19th century left us an amazing legacy that seems impossible today. And this path to the truth is worth starting with frightening archival evidence and one specific bone, the very existence of which puts an end to the theory of standard anthropology. If you look into the archives of world museums, you can find exhibits that cause bewilderment by their very appearance. Among many archaeological finds, a femur bone kept in a European collection stands out. Its size is so great that when placed vertically, It almost reaches the shoulder of an adult modern human. This is not a prop or a sculpture, but a real biological object. Simple anatomical logic and knowledge of human body proportions allow for simple calculations. The femur makes up about a quarter of a person's total height. If this skeletal fragment has a length comparable to the height of a teenager or a short man, then the owner of this bone must have towered 3, maybe 4 meters above the ground. The existence of such artifacts casts doubt on the usual anthropological scale. We are not talking about isolated genetic failures or diseases causing gigantism, where a person usually experiences huge health problems and moves with difficulty. Judging by the density and structure of the bone tissue, these beings possessed a powerful muscular frame and were perfectly adapted to Earth's gravity. They were not fragile or sickly. On the contrary, their physical power many times exceeded the capabilities of ordinary people. Confirmation of this can be found not only in museum storerooms, but also in documentary chronicles. The 19th century was a unique period when photography technology had already appeared, but the era of digital image processing was still far in the future. It is to this century that the vast majority of pictures capturing people of phenomenal height belong. On old daguerreotypes and black and white photographs, we see men and women next to whom ordinary people look like children. Their height exceeds 2.5 meters and sometimes reaches 3. Curiously, in these photos, giants are often depicted in everyday settings, calmly standing next to people of the height we are used to. The difference in dimensions is simply colossal. The head of an ordinary person barely reaches the waist of such a giant. It is also noteworthy that photographs have been preserved not only of adult men, but also of giant children. For example, a teenage girl whose height already exceeds 2 meters 40 centimeters looks like a real tower next to her peers. This suggests that we are looking at representatives of an entire population, not accidental mutants. In addition to biological remains and photographs, history has preserved objects whose creation is logical only if they were used by giants. A striking example is the so-called Codex Gigas, or as it is also called, the Devil's Bible. This handwritten book has such impressive dimensions and weight that it takes the effort of several adult men to transport it. Turning the pages of this folio is extremely inconvenient for an ordinary person, while for a creature 3 to 4 meters tall, this format would be quite standard, like a pocket reference book for us. A logical question arises: why create a book that is impossible to read without special devices, unless its customer and reader possess the appropriate physical parameters? The mystery of the 19th century also lies in the fact that it is during this period that a peak in mentions and recordings of such people is observed, after which they seem to dissolve in time. Where did these dynasties vanish to? Why, by the beginning of the 20th century, did they practically stop appearing in camera lenses, remaining only in old, fading pictures? One gets the impression that we caught the very end of the era of giants, their last days before they finally faded into oblivion, leaving us only unanswered questions. Skeptics might object, arguing that bones can be misinterpreted, and old photographs are the result of skillful perspective tricks or retouching of that time. But if biological and visual evidence can still be disputed or written off as fakes, then what about things that have a purely utilitarian purpose? How to explain the existence of everyday items and weapons that a person of standard build physically could not use, especially when it comes to things requiring precise motor skills and grip? For example, weapons. But if bones and photographs can still be attempted to be called skillful fakes, or the result of genetic anomalies, then how do we explain the existence of objects of material culture that a person of ordinary build, physically, could not use? When we enter the halls of historical museums dedicated to military affairs, we are presented with an arsenal that completely destroys the theory that only people of our scale lived in the past. We are talking about weapons whose ergonomics are designed for creatures with completely different physical parameters. Usually, historians, when faced with uncomfortable questions about giant muskets and swords, use a standard excuse. These are so-called wall guns, or ceremonial models created to decorate walls and demonstrate the blacksmith's skill. The version with wall guns sounds plausible, right up to the moment you start analyzing the design of the trigger mechanism and the stock. A wall gun, designed for firing from a support, must still be operated by an ordinary soldier. This means that the grip and trigger must be of standard size, for a human hand and finger. However, exhibits displayed in museums in Europe and Asia demonstrate the opposite. The trigger guards on these guns are of such a size that not just one index finger, but the whole fist of an adult man passes freely through them. The trigger itself is located so far from the handle that it is anatomically impossible to reach it with a finger of standard length while maintaining a secure grip. To fire such a weapon, a modern person would have to pull the trigger with their entire hand, losing control over the barrel. This is absurd from the point of view of gunsmithing, unless the shooter possessed a hand proportional to this giant mechanism. Even more obvious proof that these weapons were originally created for giants, and then adapted in a makeshift way for dwarfs, that is, for us, are the stocks. On many rifles of colossal size, one can notice rough traces of modification. The stocks are simply sawed off or cut down. Why spoil a ceremonial or masterpiece weapon by sawing off a part of it? The answer lies in simple physics. The length of the stock is calculated based on the length of the shooter's arms and the distance from the shoulder to the hand. For a creature 3 meters tall, a standard stock would be comfortable, but for an ordinary soldier, it is too long. A person simply cannot rest it against their shoulder and reach the lock at the same time. Apparently, at some point in history, when the giants were gone or their weapons fell to people as trophies, the new owners tried to use this power. But due to the impossibility of a normal grip, the stocks were cut off, turning long-barreled muskets into a semblance of giant pistols, which were probably fired from a support or by two people. A cut-off stock is direct evidence. It is technical testimony that the original ergonomics of the item did not provide for use by a person 1 meter 80 tall. A similar situation is observed with cold steel. Museums store two-handed swords, Zweihanders and claymores, whose weight and balance make them absolutely useless for combat fencing by an ordinary person. Official history says that such swords were used to chop pikes, but any practitioner of historical fencing will confirm. The inertia of such a blade with human height makes the fighter an open target after the very first swing. However, if you increase the owner's height to 3 meters, this unliftable crowbar turns into a perfectly balanced, deadly weapon, fluttering in the hands like a light rapier. In Japan, there are katanas more than 2 meters long, which are attributed to demons or gods. But the quality of the steel and sharpening suggests that these were fully working instruments of war, not religious symbols. All these objects, from triggers that a fist fits into to swords capable of cutting a rider together with the horse, create a picture of a world where war was waged on a completely different scale. These giants did not just fight. They walked this earth, leaving traces that were literally imprinted in stone, and built stairs that we would have to climb like children trying to scramble onto a parent's chair. These giants did not just fight. They walked this earth, leaving traces that were literally imprinted in stone, and built stairs that we would have to climb like children. If weapons and bones can be hidden in storage rooms, then with geological and architectural facts, the situation is much more complicated. The Earth itself holds the memory of the heavy footsteps of those who once considered this planet their home. All over the world, from South Africa to North America, researchers find imprints in fossilized rocks that anatomically correspond fully to a human foot. but their dimensions cause bewilderment in anyone used to the standards of modern anthropology. We are not talking about blurred depressions that, with a strong desire, can be mistaken for a trick of nature or water erosion. We are talking about clear footprints with defined toes, arches, and heels. The length of such an imprint often exceeds a meter and sometimes reaches 1.5 meters. Geologists encountering such finds in granite or limestone, the age of which is calculated in millions of years, often find themselves at a dead end. To leave such a deep mark in solid rock, a creature must have possessed colossal weight, or the rock at that moment was soft as clay. But even assuming it was clay, who could walk on it barefoot millions of years ago, having a foot size exceeding a human's several times over? Even more intriguing is a find that completely destroys the idea of wild prehistoric giants. In one of the geological layers, an imprint resembling a shoe print was discovered. The outline of the sole is clearly visible and, most amazingly, a heel. This is no longer just a biological anomaly or the track of an unknown primate. The presence of shoes implies technology, a culture of production, and civilization. A heel print, embedded in stone, which official science dates to epochs before the appearance of man, is a technological mystery that cannot be written off as a joke of nature. This is direct evidence that giants were not just part of the fauna, they were intelligent beings, possessing, perhaps, a level of development not inferior to ours. We find evidence of their presence not only in the wild, but also in cities that we consider our historical heritage. The architecture of old European capitals, and St. Petersburg in particular, is full of oddities that we are used to ignoring. If you look closely at some historical buildings, you can see steps whose height is completely uncomfortable for an ordinary person. Climbing a staircase where each step reaches your knee is extremely inconvenient. The biomechanics of the human step require a certain rhythm and lifting height, but these stairs seem created for creatures with leg lengths twice ours. The same applies to doorways and ceiling heights in ancient palaces and temples. Huge doors 5 or 6 meters high, handles on which are often located at the level of a modern person's head, or were moved lower in later eras, say a lot. Why build such giant entrances if the average height of a resident of that time, according to official history, was even lower than modern? The version that this was done exclusively for grandeur does not hold water when it comes to functional elements. Grandeur is one thing, but opening a multi-ton door every day is physical labor. However, for a 3-meter athlete, such a door would be proportionate, like a regular apartment entrance for us. One gets the impression that we live in ruins adapted to our needs. We build up railings, move door handles lower, divide huge halls into floors, trying to inhabit a space that was not originally designed for us. We are like small tenants occupying a house left by great masters. These architectural inconsistencies suggest that many ancient cities were not built by us from scratch, but were restored or settled by humanity after their true creators had left. These traces lead us to ancient texts. It turns out our ancestors did not consider these huge steps and footprints in stone an anomaly. They knew perfectly well who left them. They called them gods, heroes, and titans. And legends of absolutely all peoples of the world speak of them, from Sumerian clay tablets to Slavic epics. These traces lead us to ancient texts, which, upon closer examination, cease to seem like a collection of allegories and turn into a chronicle of real events. It turns out that our ancestors did not consider giant steps and imprints in stone as something supernatural or anomalous. For them, it was part of everyday reality, because they knew those who left these traces. In the cultural memory of absolutely every nation on the planet, traditions have been preserved about a race of giants living side by side with people. If we assemble these scattered fragments of the mosaic together, a global picture of the world appears before us, in which humanity was far from the only and certainly not the largest intelligent species. Let's turn to the Slavic epic, which many are used to perceiving as a fairy tale. The epics about the Bogatyr Svyatogor describe him not just as a strong man, but as a being whose weight the earth itself can barely bear. He is so huge that the famous Ilya Muromets, himself a man of remarkable strength and height, could, according to legends, fit in Svyatogor's pocket along with his horse. This description is hard to call a simple metaphor for strength. Here, specific physical parameters of the interaction of two objects of different scales are present. A giant, for whom centuries-old trees were grass, and an ordinary person forced to admit his diminutiveness. We find similar plots in ancient Greece. Heracles, the sons of Poseidon, the Cyclopes, all are described as beings significantly exceeding ordinary Hellenes in height. In Greek myths, Titans and gods do not live in an abstract heavenly world. They descend to Earth, enter into marriages, fight wars, and build cities. A similar situation can be traced in Sumerian texts. The famous bas-reliefs of ancient Mesopotamia depict rulers and gods holding lions. But look closely at the proportions. The lion in the hands of such a creature looks like a domestic cat. Historians claim that this is symbolism intended to show the king's greatness over nature. But what if this is not a symbol, but a documentary sketch? If the height of such a creature was 4 or 5 meters, then an adult lion would indeed seem like a small animal in his hands. The Anunnaki, according to cuneiform tablets, were exactly that. Tall, powerful creators whose physical capabilities seemed like magic to humans. Let's move to the east. The Indian Vedas and Mahabharata are full of descriptions of battles involving warriors and gods of colossal height. Statues of Buddha scattered throughout Asia often depict him as a giant. It is generally accepted that the size of the statue reflects the greatness of the Enlightened One. But then why is the Buddha always depicted with specific anatomical features, for example, unnaturally long ears with huge lobes? In the texts, one can find mentions that the height of Gautama Buddha reached several meters, and his appearance differed from that of ordinary people. Perhaps the statues in the rocks are not religious gigantism, but an attempt to capture the real scale of a historical figure belonging to an ancient, tall race. Legends of South and North America echo this chorus. Native Americans tell of white gods who came from the north or across the sea, who were a head, or even 2, taller than the locals. They taught people agriculture, astronomy, and construction. Viracocha of the Incas, Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, all are described as tall, often bearded and fair-skinned giants. It is amazing that cultures separated by oceans and millennia describe the same archetype. This cannot be a simple coincidence. Look at the Colossi of Egypt. Huge statues of pharaohs sitting on thrones, next to whose legs tiny figures of their wives and children are depicted. Official Egyptology tells us about hierarchical perspective. An important figure is depicted large, a less important one small. But what if the sculptors of ancient Egypt were realists? What if they simply sculpted what they saw with their own eyes? Giant rulers and their ordinary human servants or relatives of mixed origin. In this context, all ancient history appears before us as a chronicle of the coexistence of two races of different scales. We lived in the shadow of titans, learned from them, served them, and sometimes fought with them. This hypothesis explains why we still feel awe before tall people and subconsciously associate tall stature with power and nobility. It is a genetic memory of times when the world was ruled by those who could cover in one step the distance that took us 10. But if they were so powerful, possessed incredible technologies, built megaliths, and ruled entire nations, a logical and disturbing question arises. If they were so great and strong, then where are they now? Where did the civilization capable of erecting pyramids and changing riverbeds disappear to? Why are we left alone on this planet today? And why does our height seem dwarfish compared to those who walked here before us? Perhaps the answer lies in a planetary scale catastrophe that changed the very conditions of life on Earth. If they were so powerful, possessed incredible technologies, built megaliths, and ruled entire nations, a logical and disturbing question arises. Where did the civilization capable of erecting pyramids and changing riverbeds disappear to? Why are we left alone on this planet today? And why does our height seem dwarfish compared to those who walked here before us? Perhaps the answer lies in a planetary scale catastrophe that changed the very physical conditions of life on Earth. There is a hypothesis that in the distant past, the atmospheric pressure on our planet was completely different. Researchers point out that gigantism was characteristic not only of people, but also of flora and fauna. We find fossils of giant dragonflies, ferns as high as multi-story buildings, and, of course, dinosaurs. Such biological mass could only exist under conditions of increased atmospheric pressure and, perhaps, a different composition of the air, more saturated with oxygen. In such an environment, the heart is able to pump blood to a great height, and bones withstand colossal loads. But if a global catastrophe occurred, a meteorite impact, a pole shift, or the destruction of some atmospheric dome, conditions changed dramatically. The air became thin, the pressure dropped, and the giants became hostages of their own physiology. Their bodies became too heavy for the new world, and they began to slowly die out, giving way to us, smaller, more compact creatures adapted to the light atmosphere. It is possible that the process of disappearance was not instantaneous. Perhaps the 19th century, the photographs of which we examined, was the final chord of this tragedy. Those very people in the pictures, towering over the crowd, are not just circus performers, but the last representatives of a fading race who outlived their ancestors, but were doomed to disappear in a world that had become alien to them. We see their sad faces, see how they try to fit into the society of small people, using uncomfortable furniture and clothes. It was an era when ancient blood finally dissolved into new humanity, leaving us only genetic splashes in the form of rare people of phenomenal height, born even in our days. There is also a darker theory: war. Ancient epics, from the Indian Mahabharata to the Greek Titanomachy, describe destructive conflicts using weapons whose power resembles modern nuclear ones. Perhaps the civilization of giants destroyed itself in an internecine struggle for power, and we are the descendants of those who survived in the radioactive wastelands, shrinking and losing past knowledge. This would explain why we find ruins of cyclopean structures that are impossible to repeat today, and why our history is full of gaps and dark ages. We live on the ruins of greatness, not understanding their true purpose, adapting the palaces of titans to our modest needs. So who were they? Were they our direct ancestors who underwent biological degradation? Or maybe it was a completely different branch of evolution, a parallel intelligent race with whom we shared the planet for some time. Or maybe the proponents of the paleocontact theory are right, and giants are the result of genetic experiments or direct descendants of gods who descended from the heavens. Official science has no unequivocal answer because admitting the fact of their existence would require rewriting all textbooks on history and biology. But facts are stubborn things. Museum exhibits that cannot be hidden, weapons that cannot be lifted, and footprints that cannot be erased continue to scream that the past was completely different from what we are told in school. We have gathered for you only a part of this huge mosaic. There are far more questions than answers, and every new artifact found only adds to the intrigue. And where do you think the giants went? Was it a natural disaster? A war? or the natural course of evolution? Write your version in the comments. Your opinion is really important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you want more such investigations. Your support helps us not to stop. History hides many more secrets. Right now, 2 videos have appeared on the screen. One about the mysterious technologies of the past that we have lost, and the other about what was actually found in the ice of Antarctica. Choose and continue the search for truth with us.